So welcome, this is Family Assistance Centers 101. Tonight we're going to do an overview of what a Family Assistance Center or FAC operation entails, why they're set up, who would staff it, what types of events would require this type of operation. So we'll cover all of that, and then how Connecticut has adopted a plan and a model for our response in our state. So thank you to Fairfield Health Department and the Fairfield East End Medical Reserve Corps for hosting us tonight. I know we have great representation from all around the state, so thank you all for traveling down this way. And thank you to the Region 1 ESF8 Healthcare Coalition for funding this training. As San said, my name is Jessica Stelmagic. I am the Public Health Emergency Preparedness Coordinator and Naugatuck Valley Medical Reserve Corps Coordinator. It's a mouthful, I know. But I cover the towns of Ansonia, Beacon Falls, Naugatuck, Seymour, Shelton, and Derby. As Sans also said, Kathy Dean, my colleague, is here, and she is representing the Connecticut Disaster Behavioral Health Response Network, and she works closely with a lot of our mental and behavioral health partners around the state. So tonight, as I said, we'll talk about the Connecticut Regional Emergency Response System. We'll talk about the FAC operations. We'll talk about job functions, so what you can expect to staff that, how you might play a role, and our planning considerations. So all of the things that we said, all right, if this had to be active, what would we need to plan for ahead of time? What would we need to activate during? And then what would we need to do as we close up the response? So this is just a quick map of our Connecticut emergency planning regions. As you can see, our Division of Emergency Management and Homeland Security, or DEMIS for short, has split us up into 5 regions. So since we don't have county government, we kind of structure our response around these regions. And tonight we're down here in Region 1, but I cover Region 5 and Region 2. So we have this sort of great network of partners, and I know some of you are from towns in Region 3 and 4 as well. Within each region, there's something called an REPT, or a Regional Emergency Planning Team. All 5 regions have it, and they all have their own coalitions for emergency support functions. A couple years ago, the State Department of Public Health tasked our ESF8 Healthcare Coalition, which includes public health and medical services, so local public health departments, hospitals, EMS, behavioral health. They tasked us with developing these regional family assistance center response plans. So we looked at the coalition and we said, all right, let's come together and let's do something about it. So in our coalition, like I said, we have all of these different partners, and they all played a role in the planning and training and response of this type of operation. What is mass fatality management? Well, it's the ability to coordinate with other organizations to ensure the proper recovery, handling, identification, transportation, tracking, storage, and disposal of human remains and personal effects. It includes certifying the cause of death, and what we're talking about tonight is facilitating access to mental and behavioral health services for family members, responders, and survivors. So we're not just talking about the victims and their families, we're talking about us as workers as well. So family assistance centers defined. We're talking about providing family assistance, right in the name, following a mass fatality incident, MFI, or a mass casualty incident, MCI. So it doesn't have to involve death all the time. It can be significant injuries, it can be mental impact, psychological impact, it can be a number of things. So rather than just saying mass fatalities, we like to include mass casualty as well. And specific needs may vary, and they'll vary widely. So it'll depend on what the incident occurs, what type of accident was it criminal in nature, did it include planes, trains, or pipelines? So does the National Transportation Board have to come in? Is it a local event? Is it a large-scale event? Are people coming in from out of town or out of state or out of the country? So a lot of these factors have to be considered when this type of response or this type of incident occurs. We're going to just watch a quick video, and this will highlight a real-world response that happened recently. So I just want to give you a heads up, in case there might be any triggers in here, that some of this stuff is sensitive, and it's a very very overwhelming type of operation. So just bear in mind that the 2 videos we'll watch tonight are from real-world responses, but it gives us great insight into how people actually pulled together this type of operation and what it looked like and how it was different for each.
This is structured to be a very nurturing, supportive, and I think healing place.
Flowers and tissues can be seen on the tables of what officials are calling a one-stop shop for anybody who needs help. The Family Assistance Center at the Las Vegas Convention Center was first set up to assist the families of those who were killed in Sunday's shooting. Now they're opening their doors to survivors and their families. It's filled with booths offering help, everything from Airbnb to the FBI, and personal items left behind will start rolling in the next couple days. It's something the city and first responders never thought they'd have to put together. But cities who have suffered through other mass shootings, including San Bernardino and Orlando, immediately flew in to help set up the Assistance Center.
We joined a group we never wanted to join, communities that have faced a tragedy like this, and there's a responsibility to make sure that the next community receives the benefit of your experiences.
Now, these doors will be open every day from 9 to 7 until further notice for the victims, survivors, and their families. Marissa Kinniston, 13 Action News.
Something that stuck out to me when I first watched that clip was, well, first, how big of a convention center they chose to use, right? And that's because of the nature of the incident. It was a large concert, impacted many people, as we know. But when they flew over and they showed all of the stuff that was left on the lawn, right? So lawn chairs, coolers, personal belongings, all of that needed to be sorted, collected, and then tried to be reunited with the rightful owner. Another thing that I noticed when I first watched it was how many different players played a role within that FAC operation. They had governmental services there, they had private industry partners there, they had people volunteering for children, they had people ready to go with tissues and water and all the cases of water and things that they had ready to go. So a whole lot that they threw together in a very timely fashion. So what's the purpose of this operation? Well, in the immediate aftermath of this type of incident, again, whether it's a fatality or casualty, it gives the survivors and families a safe place, a central gathering where they can go in relative proximity to be connected with services, and it can be physical, it can be virtual, or it can be both. And in fact, it's recommended that if we have the capability to host hotlines or use video messaging systems, that we can connect with those family members that aren't able to travel to that location. So again, a lot of things to consider, very scalable depending on the incident. It provides a venues for authorities to provide information to the victims, their families, to access support services, everything from legal services to funeral services to travel, lodging, changing over car titles, things like that that you wouldn't necessarily think about in the immediate aftermath of this type of event if you're impacted, and facilitating the collection of information. So another key aspect about this type of operation is that a lot of data collection is occurring. Interviewing family members to find out, are there any identifying things on the victim, like a tattoo or a birthmark or a surgery scar? Is there anything that you can provide us that will help us when we're looking at the autopsy and things like that for identifying the remains? Our goals are to provide a safe, private gathering location for families of victims separated from the rest of the community. You have to remember that because of the nature of this type of operation, we don't want to be somewhere where community is going to gather, whether it's good intentions or whether it's a frenzy. We want to make sure that it's private, it's secure, that we coordinate and provide the support to meet the needs of these families, and that we have a location for the medical examiner and other public officials to meet and assist with the investigative efforts and then the release of official information. So again, these family members may not know exactly what happened. They may not understand. They may leave really not understanding still, but a lot of these deep conversations, these personal conversations, the initial grief process is going to unfold in this type of operation. So very sensitive. How did FAC come to be? Well, looking back years ago, in the 60s and 70s with aviation disasters really is where this idea came to be, and terrorism attacks. So it was noted that these horrible, horrific events were occurring and all of this other stuff needed to happen, but it really wasn't organized yet. So they played with models and plans, and over time those have developed into what the current FAC model is now. Of course it can be changed and there's variation to it, but they all pretty much cover timely and official factual information. So we're not giving false sense of hope. We're not providing promises that we can't keep. It's straight facts and it's timely. We don't want family members and people to find out things from the media before we can have the conversation with them first. Privacy and confidentiality is huge here. For anybody that's going to work this role, they really need to go through a whole level of training on privacy and confidentiality. Because it's sensitive, because of the information that's being passed around in there, because of the different types of stations that these family members are going to go through, everybody needs to be on the same page and keep things inside those doors. And then it provides a mechanism to receive support services while the families are waiting for the remains of the victims to be identified and released. So sometimes they may have a gut feeling that, okay, it's not the best outcome. It's in fact the worst. Sometimes they're not sure. It may be a chaotic event. There may be a large-scale event. So it provides sort of that period of time where they can receive that support and that psychological support and that connection while they wait for that confirmation. And as I said, it's been refined. It's been used for multiple incidents and responses, from one-person events to hundreds of people being impacted by an event. And as we move into the future, unfortunately, it's going to continue to grow and change and be applied. We're going to go through a series of pictures here, and I want you to just kind of jump out, and if any of these stand out to you and you recognize what it is, just go ahead and say, so the top left picture here in the corner, does anybody recognize what that is? L'Ambiance Plaza in Bridgeport, right? And what about this bottom right picture? The Florida pedestrian bridge that collapsed, right? So back in 1987 in Bridgeport, Connecticut, the L'Ambiance Plaza building collapsed. Workers were trapped inside. Family members rushed to downtown Bridgeport to in fact see if their family members were part of that. And there wasn't a true FAC plan or model in place at that point in the city. But what they did is officials quickly recognized the need to get those family members away from the scene. So they went down a couple blocks to a community center and had them wait there, and they ran a family assistance center operation. FIU, or Florida International University, they also stood up a family assistance center for the pedestrian bridge collapse, and they worked with the Red Cross, they worked with the school, and other partners to make that happen. So whether it was people that were directly impacted from the people that were injured, or if it was just people in the community that were a little spooked from it, they were able to go there and be provided services. Does anybody recognize the top left picture here? Katrina, right. So this is a helicopter view of looking out over the community. What about this bottom right corner? Does anybody have an idea?
Alabama?
Close.
Monroe?
Nope, Missouri, so Joplin, right? So Joplin was an EF5 tornado that completely destroyed their community, their hospital, their whole town. They were really severely impacted. And Katrina, as we know, was a large-scale event that some places are still recovering to this day. Top left picture on this slide? Oklahoma City. What about the bottom left picture?
Coal bombing.
The coal bombing. Yeah. What about the right? Right. So with the Oklahoma City bombing, again, they did their best to provide a Family Assistance Center operation and services. For the USS Cole bombing, they actually pulled together an operation very quickly for family members, other crew, and other people in that port city. And then with September 11th attacks, we had Family Assistance Centers in the city, in Pennsylvania, by the Pentagon, in New Jersey, all over. So there was multiple going on at the same time. And as we know, looking at preparedness and response at where it is today, a lot of lessons learned were from September 11th and these previous incidents. All right, so top left picture on this slide. Right, the Boston Marathon bombings. We know that there was, it's a large international event, so the city had to act quick. They had to think about logistics on how to navigate the city and how people would find this Family Assistance Center and where they could go, and they had to pull it all together really fast, just like with these other events. And the bottom right here. Right, Vegas. So 2013, 2017 here. Top left corner on this slide. Right, so the shirts kind of give it away, but with the Virginia Tech shooting, they did stand up a Family Assistance Center, and a lot of lessons learned came out of that response. So after all of these types of incidents and response activities and, these partners who run the operations, they write what's called an after-action report. So it kind of details, start to finish, what were the successes, what were the challenges that they had, and then they publish that so that other response partners can learn from it, so that they can grow from it, so that they can apply it to their own planning. And we in Connecticut actually looked at the Virginia Tech one pretty closely and took a lot of lessons learned out of that after-action report. So quick notification. They didn't have that on campus. They didn't notify that it was going on. Family members from all around the country were finding out from the media and calling students on campus, and they were finding out that something was going on from people outside. So things like that included in the after-action report, applied to planning otherwise. What about this middle picture here? Right, so this is close to home for us in Connecticut. There was several different types of operations that occurred following the Sandy Hook incident, and there was Family Assistance Center operations, there was reunification, there was also community events that were going on for grieving and memorials. So looking again at those after-action reports too, and taking lessons learned from things like privacy and location and security and access and things like that. Again, we applied to our planning today. The bottom left picture here, it's a little bit small, but can anybody take a guess at what that is?
Parkland, Florida?
Yeah, so the Parkland shooting, which was a little bit more recent. Again, Family Assistance Centers were stood up to provide services to those victims' families and to students and to community members that needed to be connected with services. So before we go into this next video, what I really want to take away from all of those past incidents that probably seem a little bit more fresh in our minds than we realized is that it doesn't matter if it's a natural disaster, if it's an accident like a building collapse or a structure collapse, whether it's an attack like a bombing or shooting. All of these types of events severely impact the community, the families, and that's why we come in and we try to lessen that on the community and the families. So we're going to just watch this short video here, and this is the mayor of Orlando, and he's giving a press update briefing following the Orlando shooting. And I want you to listen to what he says and what he talks about is going on in their operation. This is while it's still active, still running. Then there's another woman who will speak just a few moments about her role and what she's doing. And I want you to just pay close attention to what they're saying.
As our community continues to recover, the City of Orlando's Family Assistance Center is a critical connection between the victims and important services they need as part of their recovery. Behind me stand a representative sample of the individuals and agencies that are staffing the center. It's important to remember that these victims are having normal reactions to a very abnormal event. And that is why the city, working with Orange County, the state of Florida, the FBI's Office of Victim Assistance, and the American Red Cross, have assembled 35 different agencies on site to assist these victims and their families. Services at the Family Assistance Center range from grief counseling to financial assistance to obtaining visas to something that wouldn't have occurred to anybody, recovering the deceased cars and transferring title. We can't thank these organizations enough for their tireless efforts in this difficult situation, and I want to personally thank them right now. 94 families and 256 individuals have visited us for assistance. Some of the people come here thinking they need only one or two resources, but once they see the variety, they leave with so much more. One family came here not knowing what they'd be able to find. They came for one simple thing, to find out about burial, and they were able to get support from 27 different agencies.
The mayor's asked me to just talk about one family that came in with one request, and through the coordinated efforts of everyone here through the City of Orlando, 27 different agencies identified needs of this family, and by the time they left yesterday, there wasn't one single thing that these 16 family members didn't receive. And I just wanted to let everyone know that what's happening here is everything that these people need, with the love and support of the country and the world and through the City of Orlando. We're very grateful.
So this center is open to anyone who has been directly affected by the tragedy, either physically or mentally. We know that there were individuals in the club that night that may not have suffered a physical injury, but you know that they have suffered a mental trauma. And if you have a friend or a family member who is affected, please encourage them to seek help. All our services are confidential. This is a supportive, inclusive, and safe environment for everyone. And if you don't feel comfortable coming down to the site, we would still encourage you to call us at 407-246-4357, 407-246-4357, and we will reach out to you. The Family Assistance Center will remain open throughout the weekend, today until 8, Saturday from 8 to 2, and then Sunday from noon to 8.
All right, so then he talks a little bit about how they collect donations and stuff, and so I'm just going to pause it there. But, you know, again, with the mayor and with Amy from the Red Cross, the way that they are, especially Amy, right, visibly shaken. You can hear it in her voice, right? This impact that, you know, she's there helping, but it's with her, right? And that's something that I want you to think about is, you know, no matter how much training you go through, whether you're a professional with a bunch of letters at the end of your name, or whether you're a volunteer from the community just trying to step up and lend a hand, you really have to take the training seriously, and you really have to think about, can I do this? You know, am I mentally equipped to handle this type of situation? Has something happened in my past that might trigger an emotion, or, you know, maybe I'm not feeling it. So all of those things have to come into play. And then at the same time, while we're working these types of operations, we have to keep an eye out on each other. So we're there to perform a job, right? We're there to provide services to these victims' families. but we also have to keep an eye on our coworkers, our colleagues, our volunteers beside us, and make sure that if someone looks like they're, not really handling it that well, or maybe they're a little bit overwhelmed or, very upset, then that's okay. It's human nature, but let's pull them aside. Let's see what's going on. Let's get to the bottom of it and maybe, pull them from that function. So with that also being said, just because we're here tonight doing Family Assistance Center 101 training, just because I'm here presenting or our colleagues from the state and local emergency response are here, doesn't really mean that any of us would be called upon to staff this. So it's great that we can all go through the training and all learn it and all have this foundation, but each scenario is going to be really dependent upon itself. All right. So as I've said a couple times now, this is needs focused, right? So it's scalable. So it's going to be like an accordion, right? If it's a small event and maybe there's only a few people impacted, or maybe, the operation doesn't need to be so grand and large, that's okay. We can still connect people with services. Maybe we don't need a whole operation set up and staff. Maybe it can be run out of an office or, something like that. But very likely that if an event happens, it's going to require, all hands on deck and be a little bit larger for those people that would be either pre-identified to respond or called upon in that situation. So we'll look at things like the number of fatalities, the number of people that are seriously injured. We'll look at the psychological impact. So just like how the mayor of Orlando said, some people, you don't have a physical injury, but you were inside or you saw it on the news and that really resonated with you. So we want to make sure that that's captured as well and that we're able to provide services to that population or community as well. We'll look at the impact of the community as whole. So is it a local event? Like a cyclist, being hit by a car and passing away, but they were, part of the community and it's really, a tough response. Or is it a school shooting where a lot of people are impacted? Those things have to be considered and weighed. We'll look at the number of victims whose families do not reside in the disaster area. So we saw some examples where these are large-scale events with people from in town, out of state, out of the country. We have to coordinate all of that kind of thing, notifications and invitations. And then the complexity of recovering and identifying fatal and injured victims. So we'll look to our state partners for help with that. We'll have assistance with the Chief Medical Examiner's Office, our state EMS partners, our state police department. But again, it's something that is related to this type of operation. So how do we activate this type of operation? Who makes the call, right? Who pulls everybody together? Who picks the facility? Well, depends on the incident again. Is it happening with cars on a highway? Is it a big bus accident? Or is it a train derailment? Is it a plane crash? All of these things, the NTSB would take the lead on that. Is it a terrorist attack or suspected terrorist attack? Well, FBI would come in and take the lead on that. Is it a local event where the local authorities would take the lead? So all of those also have to be considered, including as many people in the planning phase. What we do in the background is very important so that we can all be clear, okay, if this happens, who's taking the lead? So an example of how we might activate a plan in our own communities in Connecticut is our local authorities will identify the need for a Family Assistance Center operation. A local emergency management director, or EMD, would notify our Homeland Security Regional Coordinator. That person would then request the activation of, say, a regional support team or some type of team of colleagues, workers, volunteers to come in and staff. They would process this request. They would look at things like, are you an MRC or CERT volunteer? Are you current on your oath that we take in Connecticut for liability protection? Are you current with training? Is your license, in good standing? And then assets will not be deployed until it goes back down to the local level and they say, okay, we can provide this. So just an example, it's going to vary based off of jurisdiction and region and state and all that kind of stuff, but this is just a sample of how it might work. How long is it going to last? Well, it could be a few days, it could be a week, it could be up to 3 weeks. Again, it's going to depend on the operation. It's going to depend on the number of families and number of individuals coming through and being connected with services. And we include things in our plans, models and algorithms that will help us determine when it's appropriate to start shutting things down and closing the doors on that. But we'll look at victim recovery, identification, other investigation activities. So all of those things will be weighed, and our incident command, our leadership of that operation will weigh all of those and then make a decision. We're looking at the short-term response here. So we're looking at quick services that we can provide immediately following that mass fatality or mass casualty incident. Now this is just a sample layout that we've used from a plan that we found online that the Army actually uses. But what this does is it gives you a visual idea of the types of areas that you need to consider that need to be in private rooms, that need to be, accessible only by very few people at a time. So when we look at places in our own communities and what might be appropriate, we try to look at a public and a private facility. So do we have somewhere like a school, but what if it happens in the school? Do we have a backup? Do we have a community center or maybe a town hall or a training facility like we're in tonight, where we have classrooms that can be closed door, where people can break off and have their private conversations? Do we have hotels or conference centers? Do we have a number of different places in our community where we can reach out and say, look, if things get really bad and something was to happen and we had to activate this type of response, would you be willing to partner with us and host this type of event? Most of the time they're going to be on board to help out. So some other things that during the planning phase that we're going to consider, we're going to walk through these. Now this is not inclusive of everything. These are things that we've looked at from plan templates, from places like other health departments or state departments or universities or Army, things like that, where they've written their plans, they've activated those plans, and they've worked. So this is just a highlight reel. If you're out there, creating a plan and working, then you have to make sure that it applies to your facility correctly. So just so you know, in Connecticut, 3 of those 5 regions have plans that are currently adopted, formally adopted, and the other 2 regions are working on them. So everybody is in motion, working to achieve the same common goal here. These 3 regions work together to create their plans. So they're very similar. They vary just a little bit, but Region 1 came through with their plan. Regions 2 and 5 actually had a joint committee that worked on it, and they talked to each other the whole time. So if Region 1 said, hey, we learned something that was really important and we think you guys should have, we said, okay, well listen. If Regions 2 and 5 said, hey, you guys missed this and we added it in ours, you might want to go back and look at yours, we did the same thing. So now, if we had to activate this type of response and call in partners from cross regions, we have a very similar plan and we're training on this, similar topics. A lot of words on this slide. Don't get scared, it's fine. Some of the main takeaways I'm just gonna highlight them in red. We'll go through them quick, I promise. But, we can assume that the demands of the Family Assistance Center operation can easily exceed our local resources. So if something was to impact our community, we can expect we're gonna have to call in help from outside. This can be overwhelming and lead to traumatic stress, so support for our responders and staff will be essential. From the time that incident is unfolding to years afterwards, we have to consider the health and safety of our responders as well. Ethnic, religious, and cultural traditions must be considered. So different religions, different cultures, different populations grieve differently. They require different things for burial and handling of bodies and things like that. So we have to try to be sensitive of that. Now, of course, what happens, happens, right? We can't, adhere to all of these rules, but we have to be prepared to have that conversation with these family members and explain that while we understand, we're doing the best that we can and, carry it out from there. We can anticipate that 10 or more family members might arrive. So in Orlando, he said, there was under 100 families, but almost 300 people showed up, right? So we can expect that to even be a lot larger in a lot of these cases. So again, coming back to where we're hosting this type of operation, can we support that volume of people? It's not an overnight shelter. Okay, so a lot of us have probably worked sheltering following storm response. We might have drilled or exercised, so we kind of have that feel of setting up an operation in a facility, but this is different. So this is going to have an open time, a start time. It's going to run for a specific number of days. People are not going to stay there. If they're coming in, just like we've said in previous, we have to set them up with lodging and other accommodations. We have decided that, we might or might not invite media, probably not, depending on the situation. We can have press conferences off-site. We can provide updates as appropriate or as they come available, but we're not going to invite the media in. Now, we watched a video that showed, the media on site at Las Vegas and welcoming, people and things like that. It wasn't open and running when they were in those doors. So while the doors are open and running, we're not going to invite the media in. If there is a large media presence, a PIO or public information officer would handle that. That would be a pre-identified person. They would have formal training. So some family concerns are that, again, they'll have high expectations regarding the identification of the deceased, returning their loved ones to them. They're going to want those people to be returned fast, right? There'll be ongoing information and updates. So it may not be, a rapid, there may not be answers rapidly available, okay? So it could take days, weeks, more, and that's really tough, especially when you're coming to this place, you're waiting for information, the news is not going to be well, you're with other grieving families. It's a hard thing to handle. And not everybody grieves the same. Some people may be in shock. Some people may be hysterical. Some people may be okay and seem like everything's fine, but they're not. So being aware and, just keeping track of what's going on is really important. We talked about cultural traditions and some considerations there, so that might impact timing and grieving, travel assistance, being connected with things like, okay, well, if I'm gonna travel to this place where this operation is occurring and I'm waiting, I might be here for a couple days or a week or whatever, I'm gonna need pharmacy for medication, I'm gonna need clothes, I'm gonna need food. Where can I go to get a rental car? All of those types of things we have to consider and try to provide help with. Family interviews will need to be conducted with multiple family members in order to collect sufficient information to assist with the identification process. This was something that we saw come out in our Region 1 exercise, I think was a good example. What happened was last year when they did this facilitated kind of discussion scenario acting-based exercise was a pair of adults, a male and a female, were interviewed together, right, about a child who had passed away in this scenario incident. And it started out fine, and they were answering questions and identifying information like color of hair or freckles or whatever it was. Then it got to a question about tattoo, and Dad said, no tattoos. And Mom said, well, a butterfly or whatever it is on her ankle. And it was like, you let her get a tattoo? And it was like, they went at it and they started having this, you know, they were acting, but they started going at it. And they had to have the workers come in and separate them and realize that, okay, let's interview you separately, pair the information after. Now, with today's world and all the variations of family and what is family and who is family, all of that needs to be considered too. So who are you going to allow in and who are you going to interview and how are you going to conduct those? You have to think about that. And you have to have quick thinking so that if something happens spur of the moment, you're able to act on that and respectfully and professionally address it. So it's anticipated that, again, we're going to exceed local resources, that we'll look to mutual aid requests for our neighbors first and then try to bring in outside players. And we may deploy additional resources like equipment or tools and computers and phones and whatever it is. So a lot of planning has to go into that. Some regions in our state have put together go kits and go boxes and strategically placed them throughout at 24/7 locations like hospitals or fire stations where they can sort of get up and running until those other resources can come in. But again, things we have to consider. All right, and certain incidents will require federal agencies to come in, like we sort of touched upon before. Really what we're talking about today and the training that we're doing and the type of operation that we're planning for as MRC or CERT or local health, those operations are beyond the scope of this. So there's even more details and layers and things that they get into, but really this is just the overview. So when we look at the site requirements, we talked about, can it support a large volume of people? Can it be secured? Are there a lot of access points, entrances and exits, windows, etc.? So our local emergency management officials will come in and help conduct site security assessments, and we have facility agreement templates. We have things like that to help guide those partners and local police and public and private partners to do that. Our site security assessment, so we do these with a lot of types of operations, whether it's mass dispensing of medical countermeasures following a public health incident, whether it's a public shelter following a storm response. So it's going in and looking at things like that, access points and volume and capacity, and is it ADA compliant, all those kind of things. So we'll look at that and outline it and make sure that these places that we're thinking are okay. Now, again, if an incident occurs where we've conducted our site assessment or our predisposed site, then we may have to move it to somewhere else and we may not have this ahead of time. So we may have to conduct this kind of as we're setting up and things like that. But we put it in our plan and we start the conversation with our partners so that we can start spinning our wheels on that. Now, when we talk about staffing and we talk about response, we're going to use the incident command system. So is everybody familiar with incident command or ICS? So a lot of head nods, yeah, it should sound familiar. So, this is foundation level stuff. Are we being assigned roles with titles that are, consistent with multiple jurisdictions so that there's no confusion? Are we using simple language? Are we, not using abbreviations because EMS can stand for how many different things, just as an example. So when we look at the FAC operation, it's going to fit into that larger incident command system. So it might have its own branch. Again, accordion-like, it's going to fluctuate depending on the operation, but this is just a sample. And again, we look at staffing tools and we kind of have algorithms that help us figure out realistically the number of people we would need to staff and for how long. When we talk about staffing, we're talking about registration and credentialing. So again, past training, what does that incident commander or that person in charge feel is appropriate for that type of operation? It may vary based off of the incident. It may change, but it's something that we think about. Identification, bringing government issued ID so that we can sign in and be credible about who we are. Do we have shift change procedures? So we know that this is going to occur over many days. Do we have a procedure so that if someone is not working 2 shifts in a row, that they can hand over all of that information, and if a family member comes back to that operation, that they don't have to do a lot of redundant explaining or communication. Staff briefings. Do we have a way to pull the staff together and say, this is our expectation for the shift. This is what we want to occur today. This is what I expect of you in your role. And then how do we handle people that just show up and they want to lend a hand, but they're not affiliated or they weren't asked to come? We have policies on how to handle that as well. When we talk about the management, again, the command staff will be determined by the scope of that incident. So really it's going to depend, but we identify as large as it needs to be and as small as it can be so that we're prepared to staff those appropriately. We talked a little bit about media and the PIO earlier. It's up to that incident commander. Do we want to have a plan for handling them? Yeah, it's a pretty good idea. Are we going to have press briefings off-site? Pretty good idea. What's that schedule? Can we release it? Great. Let's get timely information out. Let's be first. Let's be right. Let's be credible. But let's do it outside of the FAC. We're going to have a safety officer just like we would at any other type of operation, and they're going to have different various tasks, but they'll have paperwork that they have to fill out and abide by as well. A resource desk. So this would be staffed to help the families really navigate the types of services that are being offered to them. They'll have various forms, documents, they'll have different people to kind of direct them and connect them, resources that are in the community, things like that. So whenever possible though, we should have a behavioral health staff person available in this area to provide support, but to also, kind of just visually, take in what's going on and make sure that, if anybody looks like they might need attention, that we're there to provide that support. So while it can be staffed by anyone, we prefer to have a behavioral health professional there. So greeters. Does the word greeter sound familiar to some of us? Again, a lot of head nods, right? So same kind of concept. Standing at the doors, standing in the entranceways, inviting people in, explaining what's going on. What's important about the greeter in this type of operation is that that's your first kind of connection with someone. So what we learned in that Region 1 exercise that was conducted was that even the greeter, which is typically a role that can be filled by anybody with very little training, needs to have very specific training in the Family Assistance Center because your body language matters, the way that you carry your tone of voice and your stance, that's going to really resonate with the family as they're entering this unknown type of service operation. Something that occurred between the actors in the Region 1 exercise was the actor family came in and he said, "I'm here for the services." And to no fault of her own, she said, "Well, we're not providing the services here." And it turned out that she had attended a funeral service of someone in her personal life. And when she heard services, she connected that with the funeral. Now she was working in FAC. That wasn't the funeral. So she said, no, but they were there to get services. So not intentional, but something to think about. We have to be careful about what we say and how we say it and how it might be interpreted. Ushers, so people that can guide people, walk with them, so you're not saying go down the hall, take a left. We can have people actually guide them and stay with them. Family registration. So this is important because this will set the tone for the rest of their time at the Family Assistance Center. It will give them an orientation to what's going to occur, what services are going to be available to them. We want to make sure that we're able to provide language translation, whether it's sign language, whether it's another dialect. Whatever it is, we want to make sure that we have that capability. Behavioral health providers should also be on hand during client welcoming and registration to provide services as needed. Again, some people might come in hysterical. We need to address that. Some people might come in, and as it starts to hit them, we need to address that. Some people may be in shock. Also need to address that. Family members are going to sign in. If it's their first visit, they're going to have to complete a registration form. I say first visit because, again, they might come back a second or third or fourth day. If someone has presented to the registration area and is not looking for a family member, or maybe they're not giving, they're taking a long time to say a name, or, it just seems a little suspicious, notify security. We want to make sure that the people in this operation are the people who are supposed to be there. Not people fishing for insider secrets so that they can share it. We don't want people coming in with their cell phones out and Facebook living the operation or posting to social media what's going on in there. Again, confidential, safe, secure, safe space. Site security is crucial to preserving privacy. And again, family can be interpreted in many different ways, so it's going to be at the discretion of the leadership to make that call and determine who is going to be allowed to come into that operation, and based off of the relationship that they say that they do or have. So something that we've considered in our planning in a couple of our regions in Connecticut is providing colored wristbands, almost like a carnival wristband, for different days of the operation. So you come in on a Monday and it's a blue band, okay? On Tuesday, it's purple. On Wednesday, it's yellow. And the purpose of that is, well, you get banded so that they went through registration, right? So visual, easy to see. But what if I'm there in the morning and I need a break, I need to get out of here, or I need lunch, or I need to run to this place to take care of this thing, but I'm coming back later. One color per day. But when we come in the next day, if it's the wrong color, or they found it in the garbage, something like that, we know, okay, something's up. All families must remove those wristbands if they're provided them. Again, just a sample of what could happen, but if they were to receive it, they would have to discard it before leaving, just to ensure that another layer of protection there. A family liaison. So this is a person that's assigned to the family to provide the family members with a brief overview of the services. They will give them their schedule of what time they might receive another briefing. They might tour the facility with them. They're there to act as sort of a guide and a familiar face. Now, if possible, we want to keep the same liaison with the families. Again, it's going to depend on the scope of the operation and how large it is, how many families there are, things like that. But if possible, then we want to try to keep that same face there, some sense of familiarity. Vulnerable populations. So children and adults with disabilities have the same rights to services in general population as other residents. This could be physical, sensory, mental health, cognitive, intellectual disabilities. It can be a number of things. So we want to be inclusive of all of that and take all of that into consideration, from picking a location, the services that we're providing, the way that we can provide those services. If we need to modify or provide them in a second way, then we want to do that. Effective communication is key, and program modifications may need to occur. So as the operation is unfolding, some minor changes might need to be made, and that's okay. It will go through the chain of command, and it'll come from the top down, and changes might be applied. So cultural competency, linguistic competence, we want to make sure that everybody that's there understands the information that's being relayed to them. So whether it's translation services or brochures and pamphlets in multiple languages, whatever it is, we want to make sure that we're prepared ahead of time time and that we have a way to do that. We have services that we can use HIPAA compliant medical translation phones where we can call in secure lines and have hundreds of dialects, but a lot of things that have to be considered there. We talked about cultural considerations a lot, so I'm just going to breeze through this slide. But again, just know that it's something that from the local level on up to our state and federal partners, we're all considering these and doing the best that we can. We've decided that only service animals in compliance with state and federal law will be permitted at the Family Assistance Center. And I say that and we include that in our plans because if it's a natural disaster type of situation and people are displaced and have nowhere to go, they might have to think about, okay, well, what am I going to do with, my pets or so on and so forth. Well, we leave it up to the discretion again if it's appropriate to stand up a pet shelter or, if there is already, we can direct them to that service. But within the FAC, it's not the place for it. So unfortunately, unless it's, in compliance with law, we're going to ask that they not bring pets in there. What I do want to say about animals, though, and what we saw with the Parkland response was that animals can be used for comforting, right? And we know this from other examples, too. They had, I think, like golden retrievers or some type of dog, like parade waiting for them when the students came back into school. And it helped with just feeling a little bit more normal and, distraction and comfort, and helped ease that anxiety and, mental status that they were in. But again, we're going to say for the sake of the FAC operation, we're there to do a job, and that could happen outside somewhere else. Family briefings are going to be conducted as a group, so it's important to know that there will be some information that will be relayed to a large group. A lot of the conversations that will occur and information that's being divulged about individuals will be private and confidential and in those private rooms, but there will be general facts that will be provided. So having a plan for who's going to do that, how it's going to be said, the timing, is it every couple hours, is it, how are they educating the family that way? You always want to provide information to the families before releasing the information to the media, right? So we talked about learning lessons from past real-world examples of family members finding out in the media. That's terrible. No one should have to find out by going online or watching the news. So we want to make sure that we're first, we're right, we're credible. Family interviews, the primary agency in Connecticut that would take this would be the Chief Medical Examiner's Office and our state police. But this would occur within that FAC operation. So they would have people on site. They would be doing this interview process. And this type of interview within itself could very well take 20, 30 minutes. So it's not, a quick questionnaire. It's very, very deep in the layers and gets very personal and can drudge up a lot of emotion and memory. So we have to be prepared to handle those. We want to make sure that we have behavioral health support, if not there right with them, which would be preferred, right near so that they can be there to address if anything should come up. Death notifications. So, the formal notification to the next of kin is going to occur within this operation. Again, primary responsible agency would be our state police in Connecticut, but they may delegate to someone else, like a local law enforcement or the Chief Medical Examiner's Office. So we want to make sure that, again, we're just aware that this stuff is going on, so it's very sensitive again. And the release of personal effects. So, they're going to try to do the best that they can, but if there are things that can be released to those family members, they would receive that in that operation as well. So we've talked a lot about a mass fatality incident, a mass casualty incident, and without saying the word impact, we've really talked about the impact that it's having on not just those family members, but us as well, having to relay that information, having to watch people grieve. I mean, I'm the type of person where I can't even watch a cartoon cry. I'm tearing up just, thinking about it. So being conscious about, the impact, the psychological impact, the physical impact, all of it is really important. And it can be overwhelming, and that's okay. We're only human, so, we only can expect what we can handle. So we have to really, like I said at the beginning, take a step back and say, can I see myself doing this? Is this something that's, a reality for me? The scale of what's happening, is this just so overwhelming that many people are impacted? Is it a large terrorism event where it's chaotic? We don't really know what's going on. There's people in multiple jurisdictions being affected, or is it small numbers in a community? Sensation, did I see something that struck a chord with me? Was I near something where I smelt it, or did I hear a crash? Did I, all of these sensory, things we have to take into consideration and know that, if you go through something traumatic and years later it doesn't matter, if something triggers that, it can be really difficult. So just being aware of our sensations. Images. Did we see something that really impacted us that, we can't handle? And people have different tolerance for different things. I know some people who can't look at blood and guts, to be really blatant on TV, but they can perform surgeries on animals, and if it's veterinary, it's fine. There's people that on TV can watch it, but in real life, no way. So how does the visual impact affect us individually, but also as a community? Sounds, again, are we hearing things that we want to be aware about? And public exposure. So how much information is actually released at this point in time as the event is unfolding? Do we know, what happened? We don't want to be working a Family Assistance Center operation speculating about what's going on in the investigation if it's still unfolding. So being able to separate ourselves from that and to limit that exposure is important as well. Know that this is challenging for everybody. Like I said, it doesn't matter if you're a professional with a bunch of letters at the end of your name and you've responded to real-world emergencies in the past and you've been through it before. Each incident is different. It's going to affect everybody differently, and it can be challenging. Psychological support services are crucial in the Family Assistance Center. It's going to be a wide range of different types of things that we're providing. Again, very busy slide here, okay? So don't worry about really, the meat of this, but what I do want to point out is in the blue column on the left, we have our different Family Assistance Center functional areas. So we have things like staff briefings, debriefings at the end of the shifts, reunification services, if they're included, and we'll touch upon that in a little while. Our resource desk services, registration activities, interviews, death notifications, personal effect releases, and referral to community-based mental health providers. So some of these things we've talked about, right? Well, if you look at the middle column, right, a lot of the credentials required say minimally PFA training. Well, what's PFA? Psychological first aid. We'll talk a little bit about that in our next slide, but we require that we have at least this foundation, and then ideally a credentialed person, right? A credentialed professional. And some of the examples of the pooling resources that we may be able to tap into. But no matter if you're at a resource desk, a greeter, an usher, a liaison, whatever you're doing, it's important that we go through disaster, mental health, and psychological first aid training. When we talk about PFA or psych first aid, we're going to highlight 8 core actions. Has anybody in here gone through psych first aid training before? Okay, so a couple people. If you have the opportunity to attend this training, I highly recommend it. It's very important content, but it's things that you can take away that can be applied to not only disasters, but everyday life as well. And some of the things that they talk about are contacting engagement, safety and comfort, stabilization, information gathering, practical assistance, connections with social support, information on coping, linkage with collaborative services. Psych first aid is so important because it provides you the foundation knowledge of how to interpret, how to carry yourself, how to be aware about your colleagues and your surroundings, and know what to do and give you that confidence that, you know, it's okay to speak up and ask someone if they need assistance. So again, if, you know, a community partner is offering a psychological first aid training near you, I'd take it. When we talk about responder self-care, you know, we've talked about this before. Can we handle this? Do we have, you know, are we self-aware about our comfort level? Are we in good current physical health, or is, you know, do we just have a surgery, or are we experiencing something in our personal life where it may inhibit our response capabilities? Have we gone through a recent significant life event change? Do we have current family or personal network circumstances? Do we have a plan for our own self-care during the response? As something unfolds, do we tend to say, let me pull out my plan? Maybe, but it's something that we can start to think about now that we're aware and be conscious that, okay, well, if there was a large event impact or some type of impact, and I might go through some more training and really, you know, try to play a role in this, well, you know, what would be my plan? You know, what are some things that I have to think about for me first? Because we want to think about ourselves and then what we're able to provide. And then self-care following the response. So we have to know how we can handle ourselves while we're during this response, but then also following, and like I said earlier, it can be months, it can be years down the road. You know, what if something really resonates with us? How are we going to handle that? Individuals identified to be an immediate crisis, maybe they're suicidal or just very visually or otherwise upset, will be continuously monitored and immediately referred to EMS or hospital transport for evaluation. So it's kind of a caveat, right? So we know that we have to be aware about this, but we have to say it out loud, and we have to remind our coworkers and our other volunteers that this is something that we seriously have to keep an eye out for, especially when we're going through a very traumatic event and a very sensitive event. And then we have some guidance for those who might be unwilling to be transported. EMS services may or may not be available at a family assistance center. So if there's a large-scale event happening and all of the ambulances, volunteer, paid for, people off duty, on duty, if they're all responding to a scene, then they might not be able to staff that FAC operation. So can we provide simple first aid and things like that if we need to? Do we have a plan for what would happen if an incident was to occur within our FAC? And then can we connect our clients and our victims' families to healthcare providers and pharmacies outside in the community if we needed to? Site visits. So this is a touchy one because some people want nothing to do with it. I can't believe that happened. I don't want to see it. That will be with me forever if I see that site. Some people want it to try to understand what happened. Some people want it for closure. A number of reasons. Whatever it is, we have to be prepared on how we're going to handle those types of requests or people asking. So, you know, really, if we can, once the scene is secure and safe, then we're going to try to pair them up with law enforcement and have them, you know, be guided there for, you know, what they need. But it's not during the investigation. It's not while the scene is unsafe. It's not busloads of people going to the site together. But again, something that we have to plan for and know how to answer if that question comes up. Memorial events, not occurring at the FAC, right? People are going to want to. They're going to want to bring donations. They're going to want to, set up candlelit vigils. They're going to want to do all that, and that's great. That's fine. That's a sense of community and people coming together. Not appropriate for the Family Assistance Center operation. What it would be appropriate for would be a community center or a community event or something staged outside where the public can gather and do that together. Again, separate from the FAC. We talked about travel and lodging. Something that I mentioned after we watched the Las Vegas video was child sitting, right? So we saw just a quick clip of that in that video. We really juggled the idea of child sitting in our planning discussions in our regions. And we said, well, we're not here to babysit, right? We're here to do a specific job and to provide services. But at the same time, is it appropriate for young children to hear some of these conversations or to see the guardians upset, or can we be as truthful in front of them as we need to be? So we took a step back and we said, all right, well, we could assign someone to child sit while their family member is with an interviewer or with a specific operation within the Family Assistance Center. And for that time period, we'll take that child away, we'll entertain them, we'll watch them. We have paperwork to follow that, different wristbands, whatever. But as soon as that portion is done, you're going to be connected and that child care is going to be up. So again, we're not here to babysit so that we can run errands or do whatever, but we have considered it's a realistic thing that we're going to have to provide. And just with that being said too, we've looked at other state partners like our Department of Children and Family Services and our disaster children response group. So we'll bring in professionals to handle that so that they can do their own behavioral health watching and their own training to apply to that. Call center hotline. I think it's a great idea. If we have the capability, we should be able to provide some type of telecommunication line where people can call in, get the information that they need, or be connected to whatever end goal they're trying to reach. If not, we can work with state agency partners like 211, things like that, so that we can have specific information readily available via hotline or call center. Logistics, so we need to think about everything from our maintenance to communications to IT to nutrition. And here's where I talked about that. When are we ready to close the doors and to start packing up? It's never going to feel truly appropriate to do that because you're not going to want to do that. But we've said that if there's fewer than 5 clients per day for 3 days in a row, that it's dwindling down enough that okay, we can start to wrap things up and move on to the next phase of response. We have many attachments in our plans, all right? So A through Z, ton of sample forms, grids, paperwork, tables. So like I said at the beginning of this section, it's not inclusive of everything. Some plans may have more, some may have less, but these are some examples of things that really stood out to us as we were going through our planning phase. When we talk about before the Family Assistance Center, we're talking about something called reunification. In our plan, we identify this as its own separate operation. And really, it truly is. We'll talk a little bit about how survivors and family members can be reconnected. It's primarily done immediately after the incident and prior to the establishment of the FAC. So I said the FAC is immediate aftermath, right? Well, we need a couple hours to get notified, to activate, to get to the facility, to set up all those stations, to have everybody come in and get ready to staff it. So in those hours, while all of that is going on, that doesn't mean nothing else is occurring outside. Reunification's occurring. People are trying to connect with the family members that are still alive or injured or in the hospital, or we don't know where they are. So it could be moved into the FAC if it's a smaller event, but realistically, it's probably going to be its own operation with its own staffing and its own planning and own drilling and exercising. When we talk about after the FAC is closed, we're talking about a resiliency center. So this is healing and support, a resource and referral center for the public, for visitors, for responders, people who are affected. They're going to provide services like case management, counseling, FBI victim assistance services, financial services, all that kind of stuff, legal services. And this could be a years-long operation. I saw a great panel of speakers from Las Vegas when I was at a national conference, and they talked about their plans to run their resiliency center for 3 years, minimum. So they said, we know this is going to be a long-term thing. We know we have people that are affected. We know that we've experienced events in our own state where those responders are still affected to this day and still need support and are still getting support. So that's okay, but let's have a plan for it. Let's figure it out. So that was a lot of information. Thank you for sitting through it. Does anybody have any questions? I was just that good. Yes.
So you have these different appendixes. Is the whole program available to us to read? And if so, for Region 1, how do we do it?
Right. So the question was, with all of this information and these plans that are now adopted and formally, active, that can we access them? Can we see them? Can we touch and feel and see what the contents are? The answer is yes. So Region 1, its plan lives on the Fairfield Health Department website, and the URL
fairfieldct.org/FAC.
fairfieldct.org/FAC. So you can go right onto that website and you can not only see the plan that Region 1 has developed, but you can see some training material that they've conducted in the past. There's some additional resources on there from state and federal partners. So yes, so Region 1 has theirs. Region 2 and 5 also have theirs readily available. And if you are in a Region 3 or 4, reach out to your local health partners and find out where they are in the planning stage, and I'm sure that you can be included or be provided an update for that. Great. Yes?
You listed the procedure about starting an FAC, calling it up, calling it into action. How long does that typically take? Let's say you had, I don't know, God forbid, a Pulse nightclub or something like that in this area. How long would it take for the powers that be to say, we need to put an FAC into operation?
Right, so as the event is unfolding, local authorities are going to be having those conversations. They're going to be considering, the question is, how long does it take to get this Family Assistance Center operation active? Well, I think our goal is about 4 hours or so. So we want to, be aware of the situation as it's unfolding. Like I said, local authorities are already briefing and figuring out, okay, this seems truly impactful. I think we're going to need this operation. Even if we're not sure, let's get it in motion. Let's start activating. Let's get people on standby. Let's get people bringing in the resources. Let's get those go kits. Let's get the facility notified. And let's start doing it so that we can be ready to open those doors within just a couple hours after the incident has concluded. And then the duration will depend on whatever that incident is, but within a couple hours.
And what sites in this area have you pre-selected or pre-checked out?
Yeah, so when we talk about the types of facilities that we consider, that's not going to be included in our public planning for the purpose of that confidentiality and privacy reason. So, just know that we're considering public and private venues, that local officials are working with those people to scope those facilities out and to create mutual aid agreements and mutual compacts of understanding and things like that so that they can be ready to go, but they're not going to be published for the public knowledge.